So this is the most premium, the most capable, and the fastest compact crossover that money can buy. The 2023 Mazda CX-30 Turbo all-wheel drive with the Premium Plus package. And it exists in what is one of the most competitive spaces in a very highly desirable market, but tends to stand out in a league of its own. Now, the base trim level for the CX-30 starts at $25,000 and works its way up to about $35,000 for the big dog, which is this, the Turbo all-wheel drive with the Premium Plus package. So in this video, I'll be going through the exterior, the interior, the powertrain, and of course, we'll take it for a drive. So starting with the exterior of our Mazda CX-30, ours is finished in this beautiful snowflake white pearl metallic paint, which Mazda has a ton of cool metallic pearl paints, but it is going to cost you a little bit extra. So something to keep in mind, but I think it looks pretty good, especially out here in the sun. Let's get into some of the cool details. So looking at it right off the front, this looks a lot like the Mazda 3, and there's a good reason for that. This is essentially a tall Mazda 3. We'll find that the interior is very similar, as we'll get into that later. And then of course, in true Mazda style, we have this big Mazda shaped grille, which you'll find shared across a lot of the other vehicles. But we do have the beginnings of some of our cool technology. We do have this black plastic that sits here on the exterior. That is a very common theme. A lot of the competitors, Subaru Crosstrek, Hyundai Kona, all have similar black plastic that goes around the body that we'll see more as we move around the vehicle. But getting into some of the cool details, we actually have some cameras in the front which help with some of the parking and safety sensors. But let's talk about some of the cool tech in the headlights. So over here, we actually have LED headlights and taillights throughout the vehicle, but we do have some adaptive lighting, and you also get auto headlights as well. So the adaptive lighting means that when you're actually turning the steering wheel for the vehicle, the headlights will actually move ahead of you to try and point in the direction that you're turning, therefore making it safer to drive at night. So if you like safety, if you like being able to see well, that's an awesome benefit to have as well. You do have rain sensing wipers on the vehicle, and then you can also see our black mirrors, which have turn signals in them, and of course they're also heated powered. And in this thing, for the Turbo model, the Premium Plus, we actually have auto dimming in them as well, so that's reserved for the higher trim models. It may or may not be a deal breaker for you, but that's for you to decide when you're looking at which trim level suits you best. So moving on to the side of the vehicle, that black trim that I mentioned earlier, that black plastic, you can see runs all the way across the side of the vehicle, which again, super common thing to see in this space, along with these crossovers tend to have these off-roadish look to give you this sort of adventurous style. And you know, it is with good reason. The actual CX-30 here sits at 8 inches as far as ride height goes, which is actually taller than its sort of counterpart that it's based on, the Mazda 3. So if you were kind of cross-shopping the two, wondering if you wanted the Mazda 3 or the taller Mazda 3, that's the CX-30, then the CX-30 does have a little bit more, let's say, off-road capabilities in the sense that it has more clearance, but the actual off-road prowess as far as like how well does it traverse terrain is going to be the exact same as the Mazda 3. They both have the exact same all-wheel drive, which is called all-wheel drive, and does come with the SkyActiv G vectoring, which is going to help you with quartering and shifting the vehicle's weight balance just to make it feel a bit more responsive. So that's a lot of computer stuff that you don't have to worry about, that the car does automatically for you. So that's some really cool tech that's in there. One of the other things that's interesting, and seems to be for possibly gas mileage purposes, is you have a relatively flat underbottom that has some plastic trays underneath that keeps everything relatively streamlined as well. But let's move on and talk about some of the other exterior details that are on here. Obviously, you can see here front and rear, we actually have these black alloy wheels. So these are 18 inches, and they cover our brake rotors, which aren't anything too crazy. You do, of course, get 4-wheel disc brakes all around on this vehicle. In the front, you do have, obviously, electric power steering, and you'll find that you have independent McPherson struts in the front with a stabilizer bar, and then you have a torsion beam rear axle in the rear. So obviously that's going to be the same as the Mazda 3 as well. Very same, the exact identical suspension setup despite which vehicle you go for. This one just so happens to sit a little bit taller, but they do have a lot of similarities. Up top, we do have a moonroof, and then we have a roof rack. So you could actually, of course, use this if you wanted to, more of that adventurous styling. And then one of the things you'll note by looking at it is the front and rear glass are actually slightly different, and that's because the rear has some privacy glass on it as well. So it's a little bit darker, a little bit tinted, which of course is going to be 50 state legal, but happens to be equipped here as well. So moving on to the back of the vehicle, we have what is perhaps the most unique feature to the Mazda CX-30. If I go ahead and reach under on our hatch and just tap that button there, you can see the rear hatch is actually powered. That's a feature that you won't find on any of the other competitors in the space, and it's usually reserved for high-end luxury cars. Now, that may not be a big deal to you, you may not use it that much, or it could be a huge deal to you depending on what you need from your vehicle. As you can see there, with a touch of the button, it lowers right back down. Really cool feature, specific to the CX-30, makes it stand out just that much more in a very competitive space. We have our LED taillights that I mentioned earlier, along with some other badging. This one notes that it's the all-wheel drive version because it is the Turbo Premium Plus with all-wheel drive, and then more of our beautiful black plastic bumpers here, which of course make it feel a little bit more rugged to be able to take any rocks or pebbles that might get chipped up if you decide to take it off-road with your extra ground clearance, want to go camping, etc. That's going to be a bit more resistant as opposed to possibly getting some paint chips around those areas. So it sits there, but now I think it's time that we should go ahead and take a look at what makes the powertrain in this vehicle the fastest in the space. The Mazda CX-30 is available with a variety of powertrains, with the base trims giving you a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder making 186, which is at the top of the class already, but more importantly is this turbo engine, which is where it gets exciting. Now, this is a turbocharged 2.5-liter inline-4, which is shared with other Mazdas. Anything with a turbo badge will have this engine, but the cool part about this engine is it has a base rating of 227 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque, which already smokes everything else in the class, but that's the base rating. If you live in a state that has 93 octane or higher fuel available, what that means is if you fill it up, this will actually retune itself and produce 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque, which, being that this vehicle weighs 3,527 pounds, means that this can achieve a fairly swift 0 to 60 time of 5.8 seconds with a limited top speed of 128 miles per hour. Now, granted, you might not be interested in the top speed of this vehicle, but what that translates to is that means that if you live in a fairly hilly area, like to carry a lot of people, like to carry a lot of cargo, this will never be held back by that. It's the most powerful vehicle in its class, so it'll have no problem going up hills. You'll never feel held back by the powertrain in that regards. Plus, it's all-wheel drive, and they'll handle fairly quick and sort of pick up, which is just a really impressive feat on its own. But I will tell you this, if you live on the West Coast, specifically in the states around California, like I do, a lot of those states tend to get their gas from California, which usually doesn't have 93 octane. Now, some gas stations might specifically have it. You'll have to do your research and figure that out. And there are some places that'll sell higher octane, sort of more performance gas, like 100 or 110 octane, but that'll be significantly more pricey and probably won't be worth it unless you really need that extra get up and go off the bat. But the 227 horsepower I mentioned for the base rating will be on all the other types of pump gas. And to me, that's still top of the line for the class and more than enough to get you where you're going. So some cool things to keep in mind there. Now, that engine is paired with a 6-speed automatic transmission, which is also fairly unique. Most of the vehicles in this class will have like a CVT, which is not the most desirable transmission. It tends to leave a lot to be desired, but this has a 6-speed with sport modes and even has some paddle shifters that we'll get into on the interior. So if you like that nature of it, want something that feels a bit more sporty, has some unique driving characteristics, the CX-30 also has that as well. But let's move on to some numbers that you might care a little bit more about, like fuel economy and some of the total range of the vehicle. So this turbo engine does have slightly worse fuel economy than the standard naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, something to keep in mind if you're going to be using this vehicle to drive for a living, let's say. But the turbo model is rated at a city rating of 22 miles per gallon and a 30 miles per gallon highway rating with a combined number of around 25. So that's not too shabby. It's not terrible. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. And then on top of that, this has a 12.7 gallon fuel tank, which isn't that big. And with that combined rating of 25, will get you a range estimate of about 317.5 miles, which isn't too shabby. Obviously, this is going to be a great city commuter, but it's also going to be fine for getting you out of town whenever you need to with that extra ground clearance and all-wheel drive to be able to handle some extra conditions. But it serves as a just great daily driver that's really comfortable and has some really special interior options. So with that, I think it's time that we jump inside and see what's going on in there. So now we're on the interior of our Mazda CX-30. Now, this interior is styled very similarly to the Mazda 3, but I think that is a good thing. If you look at this, this is just a gorgeous looking interior. The way it's displayed, we have a mix of this black and brown. We have lots of leather. The seats are trimmed in leather. We have a leather steering wheel, even the shifter's wrapped in leather. Everything has a nice smell to it. It just looks very nice. Mazda is all about these new premium sort of upscale interiors that they're developing to go with their cars. car, which is really important because, let's be honest, the interior is where you spend most of your time with your car, especially if you live in a big city, you have to commute a lot. This is where you want to be the most comfortable. Who cares what's going on the outside? This is where you spend all your time. And Mazda does a fantastic job. You will not find an interior like this in any of the other competition cars. And obviously this gets better as you buy the higher trim models. So let's talk about some of the things that are going on in here. You'll notice that the display, in an age of touchscreens, are fairly far set back. That is an 8.8-inch screen, but it's not actually a touchscreen. We have our typical Mazda controls here, which, if you're not familiar, this is what Mazda tends to use these days. You'll find the same thing kind of across the board, and Mazda says that they do it for a safety reason. So supposedly, you spend less time using these mechanical buttons that are laid out for you here just behind the shifter to adjust things, and you aren't distracted as long, therefore, are driving safer. So that's kind of an interesting take on that, but that's why it's there nonetheless. Now we do have our shifter for a 6-speed auto, which unfortunately is the only option, no manual for the turbo options, but you do get paddle shifters with that. So if you want to put it in sport and you're feeling a little bit more excited, you could do that. As far as some regular quality of life features, you do get heated seats. The driver's seat is of course power adjustable, and you do have memory settings on the higher level options. You do have dual zone AC control, which has very nice feedback here. And I do like that all of these buttons are very clicky, very tactile, and that everything has a physical button. So for that reason, it makes it just that much easier to adjust everything. Sometimes you just don't like fidgeting with touchscreens, and that's not a problem here unless you want to mess with, obviously, your sort of source and your audio settings with that. With the audio settings, one of the other cool parts about the Turbo is the fact that we have a Bose 12-speaker audio system, which is phenomenal. Also one of the best things that you'll find in class. This audio system is great. You can adjust it however you like. It comes with center point, a lot of the audio adjustment systems, and it sounds fantastic. Not to mention the fact that this car is so quiet, the interior blocks out so much outside noise. I do have the back hatch open right now, but it blocks out so much noise that even on the freeway it's so quiet, you don't even need to have the music blasting to make up for the other noise. It's just such a quiet car with such a phenomenal system, so much good sound insulation. It's a fantastic, very pleasant car to be in, and the seats are fairly comfortable. They do have some bolstering, including some slight leg bolstering. You got some cup holders in front of our shifter here. Obviously our sport modes are nearby, and then we have our steering wheel, which I love. The steering wheel is so comfortable. You have what appears to be an analog gauge setup at first, but actually has a multi-informational display in the center that can be adjusted and rotated as you see fit. And it does have your range, obviously fuel economy. You can kind of switch it if you want it to show your driver aids, all that type of stuff. But even the buttons on the steering wheel are very clear and sort of tell you where you're at as far as touching everything. It's just a nice, very sensual feedback as far as everything goes. One of the other nice things is the backup camera. So if you put the car into reverse, this has one of the nicer backup camera settings that you'll be able to find on anything. It's currently pointing up right now because the hatch is open, but it actually shows you vertically too, so you can check how well you parked in the spots when it's in reverse, when you're backing up, as well as seeing a sort of fairly nice adaptable that changes as you move the steering wheel, which I really appreciate. So that's one of the best backup systems that you'll find on any car, in my opinion, and it just tops off what is a very nice interior as a whole, and you have a fair amount of headroom, including space for our moonroof. Then you have the back seats. The back seats are not big. This is a compact crossover. They won't fit tall adults. You can put them in the passenger seat, but it's not really set for that. So if you give a lot of adults a ride, you may want to consider that, or just kind of see how you feel comfortable-wise in the back seat. And of course, it can be folded down for more space storage if you need that as well, but it'll be fine for kids and that type of regular running. So that's a quick look at everything that we have here. Fairly easy, fairly straightforward. You won't find any wireless chargers. You do have a center console that has all of your chargers and storage, but a pretty straightforward, useful, beautiful interior with the features that you need. With that, I think it's time that we should take this thing for a drive.
So let's talk about what it's like to drive the Mazda CX-30. So right off the bat, you have what is obviously a higher up viewing experience. It's not quite that of an SUV. It's not that of the Mazda 3 either. It's in fact somewhere in the middle, hence the crossover name, or CUV as you sometimes hear them called. Now it is fairly fast and it is very, very quiet. So as we work to get onto the freeway here, we get a little bit of a, and there it is, picks up super fast. It's got a fairly good sound to it that pumps some sound into the interior, but we're getting onto the freeway, and even when you raise some of the windows, you get like a nice solid thud that reminds you just how quiet this vehicle is, which gives you a more premium luxury sense that, again, you would only find at a higher price point. Let's talk about general drivability. How does everything feel? Well, the seats are comfortable. I like the heads-up display a lot. Despite the fact that you can adjust the way the gauge reads out to you, I think the heads-up display tells me everything that I want to know. You probably just heard one of the driving aids telling me that there's somebody in my blind spot. So obviously you have a lot of the various safety systems and things like that reminding you as well that you can either turn off or turn to use depending on how you feel or what you think of those safety aids. The general drivability is very smooth. There is a bit more body roll, which comes with the territory that this sits a little bit taller. So as you, if you ever do some heavy braking or go into a turn at a fairly high rate of speed, you'll note that the car kind of tends to sway a little bit more than it might with the Mazda 3, for example. But personally, I don't think that's a big deal. It would be even worse if you were in a bigger, taller SUV. So I figure that's a good middle ground for that. Not really a big deal. As far as the actual steering goes, a lot of people tend to think that the Mazda steering can sometimes feel like it's not variable enough, that it doesn't quite turn enough. Personally, I really enjoy the way Mazda does their steering. I feel like it actually makes the driving experience more engaging. It feels like you are more involved when you drive the car, but that's not to say it's a lot of work to drive the car. It's still very light, very easy to use, and everything is just comfortable and does what it needs to do. But it's the fact that it feels more engaging. If you're on a twisty, turny road, I think you'll enjoy it more in the Mazda than you would if you were in one of the other competitors in this space. And so, you know, not that we tend to think about crossovers and driving experience, but the fact that this has it, I think is worth pointing out nonetheless. As far as the just general nature of it, your visibility is really good. The back window feels like it's a lot closer. The mirrors are fairly good. You have your blind spot monitors. Everything just sits right, and it will do a great job of getting you from A to B if that's all you're interested in using it for. But I think it can do so much more than that and not just be shelved. But that's a basic view of what it's like. It's a fairly quick car. It's comfortable. You get high visibility so you don't feel so low or compressed in tight spaces in bigger cities. But it's also a very capable vehicle with all-wheel drive that'll help you in worse weather conditions. I also want to point out that I forgot to mention that the vehicle does have keyless entry, which is super helpful. Push-to-button start, and it does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which are always critical, but of course come standard in a lot of the nicer vehicles that just make the whole experience that much better, especially with the Bose system. I almost feel like connecting your phone to the Bose system sounds better than just listening it through the standard radio, which I think is really impressive and just speaks again volumes of how good the sound system is. I wish I could show you without getting demonetized, but you know, that is what it is for YouTube. So copyright strikes aside, let's talk about in conclusion. So in conclusion, what you have here with the Mazda CX-30 is Mazda's crossover that sets itself apart by being a premium and the fastest vehicle in this market segment. Now, the fuel economy is very mid-tier as far as it's concerned with this vehicle, so if that's a big deal to you, you may want to consider going to one of the lower trim models, as the smaller engine actually is rated for better fuel economy, but you won't have that power that you get, which I personally always like to have a vehicle with a little bit of oomph, because what that does is that allows you to be able to pass people if you live in an area with 2-lane roads, and it just helps you get uphill if you carry people in your car. Whatever the case, it's always nice to have more power, in my opinion, so I personally prefer that and willing to accept the fuel economy loss, especially if most of what you do is highway driving. You're going to be getting 30 miles per gallon, which is still fantastic. So with that, that's the little note, but I would say in everything else, the premium interior is unmatched in the tier. The performance that you get is unmatched. This vehicle stands well above the others, and you know, it changes on a generational basis from what vehicles tend to see the highlights, but at this moment I think Mazda's got it nailed with a very unique vehicle. Again, I mentioned that transmission, even the shifts, the fact that you have the sport mode, all very unique. It's going to feel different in the Mazda CX-30, but it's so smooth still, as opposed to a CVT where you can get some of the rubber banding issues. It's a phenomenal vehicle, and I think the fact that it's available is as low as $25,000 all the way up to $35,000 with the turbo all-wheel drive model makes the CX-30 perhaps the best vehicle in the compact sort of crossover space. So with that, that's going to be the end of the video. Are you interested in purchasing a CX-30, or do you already have one? Let me know down below, or if you have any questions, I'll be happy to do my best and answer them. If you enjoyed the video, can hit that like button for me. I'd really appreciate it, and consider getting subscribed for more content like this in the future. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.